Hey, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and today is an exciting day because we have a solo Q&A. So it's been quite a while since I've recorded a Q&A podcast, so I'm excited for this one. I've been recording with a lot of guests lately. Hopefully you've been enjoying those episodes. And yeah, so we have a few questions today. Before we jump in, I do want to announce that we do have a few spots left for the second round of the Muscle Science for Women program. So that's going to be starting officially on January 10th. So if you're interested, if you haven't signed up yet, you're interested in learning more about the program, I will add the sign up link in the show notes, or you can just go to metflexlife.com/MSW. So again, the second round is going to start on January 10th, 2022. If you're listening to this after that date, you can still go to the website to sign up for the email list so that you're notified, when the next round will be, which I'm not sure when that will be, but in the future. And you can also learn more about the program by going to metflexlife.com/MSW. We actually have a bunch of testimonials from previous members who have gone through the program. They talk about their experience in the program, what they learned, the results that they got. So those are all on that page, metflexlife.com/MSW. And again, we do have a few spots left at the moment that I'm recording this podcast. So definitely jump in there if you're interested. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. You can contact me on my website or send me an email, rachel@metflexlife.com, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. All right, let's jump into today's solo Q&A. Okay, the first question today, can you gain muscle while in a slight deficit, or are you just lifting to maintain? Okay, this is a really, really good question. And just like many other questions, it does depend on the individual, especially when we're talking about exactly, where you're coming from, right? How long you've been lifting, how long you've been dieting or in a deficit, how advanced you are when it comes to, and this goes back to how long you've been lifting, but how advanced you are with your training, right? So have you been lifting, for many, many years? Do you already have a ton of muscle, or are you newer to lifting, right? Or are you coming off of a long period of time where you took a break? Maybe you're coming off an injury or just a period of time where you weren't really consistent. So those are kind of going to be the main factors involved in whether or not you can gain muscle in a slight deficit is really going to be dependent on where you're starting off at, right? When you're asking this question. So if you are more advanced, if you've been lifting for a while, if you are kind of in that more advanced side of things, then gaining muscle in a deficit is going to be a lot harder. Not to say that it can't happen, but it's just going to be harder than if you were someone who was newer to lifting. We kind of call this your training age. So like how long you've been consistently lifting, consistently following a smart progressive program. That's important too, because there's different aspects to lifting, right? There's different ways to exercise. Obviously, there's different ways to lift weights. So like, for example, have you been someone who's been doing CrossFit for a while and now you're switching over to doing more of a bodybuilding hypertrophy style training? That in itself, right, switching the stimulus, switching the way that you're training is going to add a little bit more novelty. It's going to add, something that, might actually help you to, well, obviously if you're going from CrossFit training to hypertrophy style training and really focusing on that, you definitely are probably going to build a little bit more muscle, because obviously hypertrophy training is specific to building muscle, whereas CrossFit training is more of a sport. It's more performance based. Not saying you won't build muscle with CrossFit, but that's just an example. So if you're switching the type of training you're doing, if you're, increasing your volume or increasing your intensity, or just switching things up, you're getting better at the execution of the particular movements that you're doing, like all of these things play into it. But in terms of, gaining muscle in a slight deficit, I definitely think, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably can do that. It just might take a little bit longer, especially if you're like the more advanced you are. So the newer you are or the less advanced you are, the more, I guess, the more runway you have to be able to build muscle while not having kind of your nutrition on point for exactly where it needs to be when we're talking about optimizing muscle growth. So if we're talking about optimizing muscle growth, that is for anybody, that's going to happen when you are consuming maintenance calories or in a slight surplus. But in terms of, building muscle in a slight deficit, I think, especially from what I've seen with my clients and even myself, from different ranges of, beginners to intermediates to advanced, one of the biggest things that a lot of people kind of miss out on or don't think about when it comes to this question about building muscle in a deficit is really like, do you have everything else in check? Because if you don't have other things in check, it's just going to make everything else harder in general. So when I say having everything else in check, I mean like having your ducks in a row with your nutrition, with your recovery, with your sleep. Like are you consuming enough protein? Are you optimizing your protein intake? Are you optimizing your sleep? Are you optimizing your stress, your recovery? Are you, getting enough fuel in the form of those macronutrients to actually fuel your workouts to build muscle, right? So for example, if you're someone who's coming from like a lower carb diet and you decide that you want to go into a slight deficit and focus on building as much muscle as possible with, that in mind, it might make sense to actually start to incorporate some more carbs, right? To optimize your performance. So there's all these kind of different things that we can really kind of dive into to optimize for you as an individual. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning of this question that it is very individualized. But from my experience, I have seen that people, especially my clients, those beginners especially, but even intermediate, and even some advanced, can still build muscle in a slight deficit and especially get stronger in a slight deficit, as long as you have everything else in check and as long as you're setting up your nutrition so that it makes the most sense for you and it helps you to perform your best during your workouts, because obviously that is where the muscles, that's where you're going to build muscle, right? You need to be following a structured, progressive lifting plan, and you also need to make sure that you are recovering optimally. That's a huge piece that a lot of people miss out on. And with all that being said, this is literally exactly what we dive into in the Muscle Science for Women program. It's how, we teach you how to set up your nutrition for your specific goals, whether or not it's to lose body fat, to maintain and focus on body recomposition, or if you're ready to kind of, go into a slight surplus and really, really focus on optimizing muscle building. We break it down and teach you exactly how to do this and exactly how to set up your personal nutrition for your specific goals. And then obviously within the program, it's all about optimizing muscle building, right? Especially for the female. So yeah, that program is 3 months long and it is launching, or it is starting very soon. I announced this in the intro, but if you're interested in signing up for the Muscle Science for Women program, the official start date of the second round will be January 10th. So definitely go to the page metflexlife.com/MSW. You can learn more about the program. You can hear from testimonials from prior members who have gone through it. You can hear about their results, all that jazz. So I will link that in the show notes, or just go to metflexlife.com/MSW. And if you're listening to this after January 10th, we will definitely have, another launch in the future. Not really sure when the third round will be, but you can get on the email list to learn more about that. So yeah, hopefully that helped answer your question. Again, it is very individualized, but from what I've seen in my coaching practice and even with myself, just once you can get some of the things that might not be kind of in check, you'll be able to optimize what you're doing a lot more. And again, that comes back to making sure that, protein is on point. Maybe, you haven't been incorporating carbs, strategically for the goal at hand. So maybe adding some carbs in, especially pre and post workout, making sure you're sleeping, recovering, stress management techniques, all that. So those are going to be things to think about, and things that, a lot of people tend to forget about when it comes to changing your body composition. A lot of people think, okay, if I want to build muscle and lose body fat, I just need to make sure that I'm in a deficit and that I'm lifting weights. Well, yeah, that's kind of the overall, but if you're not, pinpointing certain things within that. If you're not getting specific about certain things, then you're missing out on a lot of stuff. So hopefully that helps. And yeah, if you're interested in muscle science for women, check out the page, metflexlife.com/MSW. Okay, the next question: how much protein do I need to eat per meal when I'm trying to build muscle? Okay, so another muscle building question. So again, we do discuss this extensively in the Muscle Science for Women program. So I'm just going to keep plugging it because we're starting very soon. And like I said, we have a few spots left. So anyway, I will answer this question. But if you want to get kind of the full details and really, really dive into this in the nitty gritty details, then definitely check out the program. But in general, for optimal muscle growth, we do need to consider what we call muscle protein synthesis, or some people refer to it as MPS, which is basically the process of your body turning dietary protein into actual muscle tissue in response to both your protein feedings and resistance training. Because we know that the two primary ways that you're going to build muscle is obviously resistance training, sending that signal to your body that says, hey, like, I want to build some muscle. That's going to come from resistance training. If you're not resistance training, if you're not following a smart progressive program, it's going to be hard to optimize that muscle growth. And then also the second, most important thing is making sure that you have optimal protein intake to fuel that muscle building, right? To fuel your muscles, not just to train and to have enough, amino acids available to build new tissue, but also to recover from that training. Because when you're training, when you're in the gym, you're actually breaking down your muscles, right? It's called muscle protein breakdown. So you're breaking down your muscles. And then when you are recovering, when you're sleeping, when you're eating, right? That is when you are actually building up those muscle tissues. That's when the recovery happens. That's when, muscle protein synthesis happens. So those are the ways that, the two main ways that you build muscle is making sure that you are resistance training and that you are getting adequate protein. Obviously, there's a lot more involved there, but those are probably the top two most important things that, if you don't have those in check, then you're just making your life a lot harder. So at the end of the day, though, when we're talking about how much protein per meal, there are definitely ways to optimize this. But like I said, at the end of the day, it does mainly come down to your total daily consumption, right? Your total daily intake of protein per day. That's going to be the most important overall. But if we're talking about optimization and, being as efficient as possible, the key is that you want to plan and also adjust your portion sizes for the protein feedings that you're having throughout the day to equal at least 25 grams or more. And this is a generalization. We can definitely get more scientific on this and kind of break down more about, the leucine threshold, which I'll talk about in a second, and how that can be very, very individualized to the person based off of your body weight, your lean body mass, all of that. But generally, for most people, the sweet spot to optimize muscle protein synthesis is going to be above 25 grams of a complete source of protein. So that's something that contains all the essential amino acids, right? So animal-based protein or combining plant-based proteins to create a complete amino acid profile. And that, to optimize that muscle protein synthesis, hitting above 25-ish grams of protein is going to be kind of a general place to be. For most people, the sweet spot is going to be probably between 25 and 50 grams, depending on your body size, your personal digestion, your overall caloric intake, all of that. And then also the previous point that I mentioned about that 25 grams, like I mentioned, it does become even more important when we talk about something called the leucine threshold, which I just mentioned. So leucine, if you're not familiar with leucine is an amino acid that stimulates MPS, or muscle protein synthesis. And it is something that we need to consume in a certain amount in one sitting before we can actually optimize that threshold of quote unquote, turning on muscle protein synthesis. And so for most people, that leucine threshold can be hit by consuming, like I said, over 25 grams or between 25 to 50 grams of high quality animal-based protein, or a protein source that is complete, if you're vegan or vegetarian, protein that contains, all the essential amino acids. So combining incomplete proteins to make complete proteins, all that jazz. And also something to consider too, the leucine threshold also goes up as you age, which means that, as you get older, you actually need more protein to continue to stimulate that muscle protein synthesis signal as much as possible. So that's just another kind of side point there. But also the thing to realize too is some people get this confused. They think that, oh, I can just consume, a bolus of leucine and I'll be good to go. That's not really how it works. Leucine is important because you do want to make sure that you're hitting that leucine threshold to optimize muscle protein synthesis and to kind of turn that signal on. But leucine is not so much like a light switch. It's more so like a dimmer switch. So yes, you can be consuming, amino acids, protein, and not have, an optimal amount of leucine and still see, muscle protein synthesis occur. But we're talking about optimization here and really getting the most bang for your buck, right? So with hitting that leucine threshold, you're going to, make sure that you do turn on that muscle protein synthesis switch to its greatest degree, right? And so making sure that you're getting a significant amount of protein within each feeding throughout the day is going to allow you to optimize muscle protein synthesis. Another thing to realize too is that you do need all the other essential amino acids as well to be able to, optimize this. So it's not just that leucine is, the only it's not just that leucine is the only amino acid you need. You need all the other amino acids as well. That's why it's important to have a complete protein source when you're thinking about, the foods that you're consuming, the proteins that you're consuming. Like, for example, peanut butter is not a complete protein source. I wouldn't even consider peanut butter as a protein source at all. It is more fat than it is protein. So if we're actually getting down to the nitty gritty, peanut butter is definitely, I consider a fat source. So those are things that you need to consider, right? So with all that being said, to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis throughout your day, it's also probably optimal to spread your protein intake across the day as well, right? So if you can kind of spike muscle protein synthesis multiple times throughout the day, you're going to be, optimizing your ability to build muscle because you're going to be optimizing that signal that occurs multiple times throughout the day versus, if you only had a 25 gram serving of protein twice a day. Not saying that, you won't build muscle, but it's probably not going to be optimal versus if you had that, 3 or 4 times spread throughout the day. So it's just, there's a lot of things to consider, with this. Again, it comes back to individual. It comes back to your personal, digestion, your personal, body size, preferences, right? What are you, vegetarian? Are you vegan? That's also going to play a role. If you are vegetarian or vegan, in order to get, enough amino acids to be able to optimize muscle protein synthesis, you have to kind of go through a few other steps as well, because some of the sources that you're getting are not going to be, like I said, as complete. They're not going to be as bioavailable to your body. So those are all things to consider as well. But again, we take a deep dive into how to optimize protein intake specifically for women, because that is something especially that I've seen in my coaching practice, is that any female that comes to me when we're working together, the number one thing that usually I always do is bump up their protein, because they're always typically eating less than optimal, or at least from my experience, less than optimal. So that is one thing that is super important. We can really, really see amazing changes from just making a few tweaks within different macronutrients and protein and things like that, calories, things like that. Throughout your day, you can see significant changes in body composition by just making a few tweaks and getting consistent with those. So yeah, that's what we dive into in the Muscle Science for Women program, kind of go over exactly how to set up your day, how to optimize, your ability to build muscle and also change your body composition, lose body fat while building muscle. We talk about body recomposition. We talk about the previous question, which was, can you gain muscle in a slight deficit, going into detail with all of that. And yeah, so again, if you're interested, definitely check out Muscle Science for Women. MetFlexLife.com/MSW is the page. But hopefully that answered your question or gave you a little bit of background into how much protein per meal. Again, it is more individualized. There are some nuances there. There are some specifics that, some people want to get into, some people don't. But again, if we're talking about optimization, there's always going to be ways to make certain tweaks to optimize what you're doing and to, again, get the most bang for your buck, right? If you're going to the gym, if you're working hard, multiple days a week, then you need to make sure that you have your nutrition in check too, because if not, you're just going to be doing a lot of hard work and not reaping the rewards that you could if you just, tweaked a few things within your nutrition. So something to think about, but hopefully that helps. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, the next question. How long should I stay strict keto before flexing? I love this question. Okay, so this is another one that does definitely come back to the individual. This is very individualized to the person depending on how long they've been following a ketogenic diet, what their specific goals are, how, active they are, what their metabolic health is like, all of that. Again, when it comes to nutrition, there's a lot of individualization that you have to take into account. But to generalize this question, to kind of give you my 2 cents based off of my experience being in this space, working with tons and tons of clients and specifically females, I would say that, with answering the question, how long should you stay strict keto before flexing, or before, when she says flexing, meaning incorporating carbs to, start to become more metabolically flexible or start to, work towards that. I would say that a minimum of probably 3 to 4 weeks, to actually see if you're benefiting from following a strict ketogenic diet. So I go through this in, my book, The 21-Day Ketogenic Diet Weight Loss Challenge. That's there's a reason why there's 21 days. Really, especially if you're completely new to keto, if you've never done it before, going through, a few weeks of being strict and really just seeing how your body responds. Obviously, the first, week or two is really an adjustment period, especially if you're coming from following like a very, standard American diet and very high carb approach. It might take you a little bit of time to adjust until you really start to see some benefits. And then for some people, they adjust and they don't really see that great of benefits, after those 3 to 4 weeks. So it does take time for your body to adapt, but I would say at a bare minimum, sticking with it for at least 3 to 4 weeks, 21 days to obviously a month, is probably a good ballpark to stay in with for most people when we're talking about staying strict. And again, there's more details, if you're new to keto, if you're interested in trying, a ketogenic approach for a short period of time, I have a program. It's called Keto Kickstarts on my website. You can find it under my programs tab. If you go to metflexlife.com/programs, all of my nutrition exercise programs can be found there. So yeah, definitely check that out if you're interested. But we also have to consider, like, what are the reasons that you're doing keto or that you're trying a ketogenic approach? Is it for overall health? Is it for blood sugar regulation? Like, do you have some metabolic issues that you're trying to, treat? Is it, disease prevention or treatment, like I mentioned? Is it, fat loss, to lose weight? So it really also depends, like, what's your main reason? Is it for mental clarity and focus? There's a ton of different benefits of, going towards a ketogenic approach, but it really does come down to like what your particular goal is with that, and also like what your history is and all of that. So that's going to be more the individual basis. But in terms of, when you kind of should start to incorporate carbs again, that's kind of another discussion. But there are a few common signs and symptoms that I've seen within my own coaching practice, within myself, within a lot of my clients who are moving away from keto and bringing carbs back in for a more balanced, metabolically flexible lifestyle. There are a few common signs and symptoms that I've seen that are kind of telltale signs that are like, all right, it's time to start bringing carbs back in. And obviously on this podcast, that's what we talk all about. We talk about carb phobia, talk about, the benefits of keto, but also the drawbacks of keto. So some of those signs, some of the common ones would be higher anxiety or restlessness. So like, you've probably heard of being wired and tired. So for example, at night, if you are like just super exhausted and you lay your head down on the pillow and you just can't fall asleep because your mind is racing, you're kind of feeling that wired and tired feeling. Obviously this can occur for many different reasons. I know for me, sometimes it just happens because I have a lot on my mind, right? I'm running a business. I have lots of clients, programs launching, for example, Muscle Science for Women, lots to do there. So my mind's racing, right? I'm super excited. So that's kind of, you have to distinguish between that. Like, is it just one night or two nights where this is happening and you have other things going on in your life? Or is this something that's consistent and it's, you've been consistently low carb keto for a long time and it's not getting better, right? So that's a sign, that could be a common sign, higher anxiety or restlessness, menstrual cycle irregularity, or increased PMS symptoms. Again, though, realize that these can go either way. For some people who are not keto at all, they can have these issues, right? And sometimes going keto actually can help resolve some of these issues. It can actually help resolve some anxiety and some menstrual cycle irregularities, but it all depends on, where you're coming from and obviously your history and all of that. But if you are someone who has been strict keto for a while and you are, having some of these symptoms, then it might be signs and symptoms that it might be time to start thinking about incorporating carbs. Obviously, if you're struggling with that, I have tons of resources on my website, lots of previous podcasts all about carb phobia. I have my Keto for Women program, which is a deep dive into how to incorporate carbs back into your life after strict keto, how to use that strategically, specifically when it comes to fat loss. So lots of different resources. So definitely check out my website, check out my programs or previous podcasts if you're interested in that. A few other signs and symptoms. One other big one that I've seen and actually happened with me is unsatisfied by foods that have higher fat, and you're craving foods that are more whole food carbs. So like potatoes, fruit, things like that. Like if you've been strict keto for a while and you're not really feeling satisfied by the foods that you're consuming, especially if they're higher fat foods, and your body is like craving sweet potatoes or just fruit, that's probably a sign that, hey, like we need to incorporate a little bit more carbs and not be afraid of those, right? A few other signs would be not having any improvements in your training performance or having a decline in your training performance. That's kind of a red flag. And also if your goals have changed. So, if your initial goal going on keto was to lose weight or lose body fat and you were able to do that, but now you kind of maybe you lost weight and you're not really satisfied with the body composition that you have now, and you realize that maybe you didn't have enough muscle underneath that body fat to kind of look the way you wanted to look, right? Toned or lean, whatever you want to call it. That's usually a result of just not, like I said, not having enough muscle. So if your goals change, if your goal is now to start to put on some muscle tissue so that you can, actually look quote unquote toned, then it might be time to actually start incorporating more carbs, right? To use those to fuel your workouts, to recover from your workouts. Again, those are all the things that we talk about in the Muscle Science for Women program. I'm going to continue to plug that because it is just, there's so many different aspects of that program that are beneficial to not only just learning about building muscle and training efficiently, but also like how your diet plays into that and all the different aspects of that. So yeah, those would be some signs and symptoms that I've personally seen for, when it might be time to incorporate carbs. But yeah, again, this comes back to the individual in terms of how long you should stay keto before, or how long you stay strict keto before flexing. It definitely is going to depend on your goals, your history, where you're coming from, all that jazz. But hopefully that gave you some insight. All right, last question today. If doing a cut on keto, do you track and cut calories like on other diets? Okay, so the general answer is yes, right? So when it comes to, losing body fat, when it comes to losing weight, and going on a diet, no matter what type of diet it is, we still have to follow the laws of thermodynamics. We have to follow the kind of, generalization. And this is a generalization about calories in, calories out. It does matter, right? You need to be in a deficit to lose body fat. But there's a lot of things that go into that, right? There's a lot of different aspects of overall health that goes into whether or not you're going to be successful with your diet protocol and also be able to maintain that fat loss and that weight loss after the fact, right? So yes, you need to be in a deficit. You need to reduce, calories to be able to lose body fat and lose weight. But there's a lot of different factors involved as well in terms of, are you losing that weight? Is it coming from body fat, or is it coming from body fat and muscle? We don't want that to happen. So we need to optimize for that. Depending on your specific health history, what's going to make it easier for you to adhere to a calorie deficit, that's going to play a role too. But when it comes to using keto as a fat loss diet, for some people it can be beneficial. For some people it might not be the best choice, actually. But one of the mistakes that I do see a lot of people make, and this is a mistake I made in the beginning too when I first got into keto years ago, was just not paying attention to my intake at certain points and just swapping the carbs for more fat, right? So if your goal is fat loss, like I said, you need to be in a calorie deficit. So if you're just taking out carbs and replacing those with a ton more fatty foods, and you're still kind of in caloric balance, or some people even go into a surplus because they just don't realize it, you can gain weight. And you can also obviously not lose weight. So you need to pay attention to that. And you need to realize that, keto isn't a magic weight loss pill, isn't a magic fat loss pill. It can make fat loss easier for some people, right? Definitely, especially if you're coming from, having blood sugar dysregulation issues, having, if you're insulin resistant, if you are severely overweight, if you are, not very active, there's a ton of different ways that keto can be beneficial. And there's tons of different people that I've worked with in the past that have absolutely benefited tremendously from following a ketogenic diet and kind of adopting it as a lifestyle as well. So those are things to consider, but to answer this question, if you're doing a cut, you definitely should track your intake, right? Because if, what's not measured isn't managed, right? And it's kind of just, if you're not really, yes, you can get away with, swapping out your carbs for, higher protein, higher fat foods, and, notice that you'll have more satiation. And so you end up just not eating as much throughout the day. Maybe you get into some fasting. So those are different ways that keto can make things easier for a lot of people. But again, it goes both ways. Sometimes that can be the opposite effect for other people. So it's really just kind of testing and assessing for yourself and figuring out, what works for you, what you're seeing results with, what you can adhere to most. That's the biggest thing. I also actually recorded a video on this exact topic on my YouTube channel. So I will link that in the show notes, or you can just go to my YouTube channel and look for the playlist labeled keto. And there's going to be a ton of questions I answered. And I believe this question is called, is keto the best diet for weight loss? Again, I'll link the specific video in the show notes so you can check it out. But on my YouTube channel, I have tons of Q&As that I recorded a while back. I think it's like 70 plus questions of like the most common questions I got about keto, metabolic flexibility, weight loss, exercise, things like that. Those are all up on my YouTube channel if you want to check those out. But yeah, check that video out. It's going to answer this question in more detail. But in general, yes, I do recommend tracking. Like if your main goal is to lose body fat, it's important to at least track to some degree. It doesn't mean that you have to track every single macro every single day and get really, really kind of, hung up on that. But there are different tiers to tracking. There's different ways to optimize what you're doing so that you can get to your goal faster and more efficiently, and then also maintain the goal that you achieved, right? So all those things play into it. But yeah, hopefully that helps. And again, I'll link that video that goes into more details to answer this question in the show notes, or just go to my YouTube channel and check out my playlists I believe this one is under the keto playlist. All right, that's all the questions we have for today. If you're enjoying these solo Q&A episodes, definitely let me know. You can reach out to me on social media, leave a review on iTunes, and let me know that you love the solo episodes. That will just kind of, be a prompt for me to do more of these more often. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of guest episodes, but I do love answering questions. And, if it's helpful to you as a listener, I would do these more often. And yeah, so just let me know. Again, leaving a review on iTunes, letting me know would be awesome. That'll help also, grow the show. And if you are interested, I've talked about this many times throughout this podcast, but if you're interested in signing up for Muscle Science for Women, again, the program is going to start January 10th. As of this time that I'm recording this, we do have a few spots left. We limit the amount of spots we have. So if you're interested in learning more about all the things I talked about in this episode and just want to learn more about the learn more about the program, what it involves. We have a whole course curriculum on the website. We have testimonials that you can hear from other members who have gone through the program, seen their results. You can literally see their results from their before and after pictures and hear from what they have to say. So if you want to check that out, again, go to metflexlife.com/MSW. I will link that in the show notes. And I have a ton of other things on my website as well, just at metflexlife.com. Lots of recipes, blog posts, free information, previous podcasts, all that jazz. So definitely check that out. And I look forward to hearing from you, hopefully in the iTunes reviews. All right. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time.